you made a Venn diagram with 3 circles, and the first circle was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and the second circle was the wife of Pontius Pilate, and the third circle was the barbarians and the snuggly duckling, the shaded area in between would be they had a dream. And because we're working our way through the book of Matthew, currently in Matthew chapter 27, I'm most interested in the one that Pontius Pilate's wife had. She's an interesting character historically. There's a lot of legend that's arisen around her, and so it's a little difficult to separate fact from fiction. The only mention of her in the Bible is what we get in Matthew 27, where it says, while Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I've suffered a great deal in a dream because of him." There's a little bit of ambiguity in that passage, right? Like, why is that in here? What was she actually thinking? And I think the ambiguity of this premonition and this little verse right here is part of what lends to all of this historical religious curiosity that comes along with her. History tells us that her name is Procla or Procula, which I know sounds a lot like Count Chocula, and so it always bothers me to say that, and I feel uncomfortable. The Romans would have called her Procula, and in the East they would have called her Procla in the Greek-speaking part of the world. And to this day, it would be Saint Procla, because though she is not venerated by the Catholic Church, the church associated with Rome, she is venerated in a whole bunch of different Eastern traditions, including the big one, the Eastern Orthodox churches in general. She has a saint day and everything. And the stories that evolve around her moving forward are that she had other, not visions, but miraculous encounters. She came back and she was more involved, according to some of these much later apocryphal Christian fan fiction writings that came, again, hundreds and hundreds of years after the fact. There is no confusion here about the kind of documents we're talking about as to whether they belong in the Bible. We're talking about like the Gospel of Nicodemus, which is further from Jesus than we are from like Shakespeare. Huge amounts of time elapsed. And I think it was known to the original audiences of these much later Christian fan fiction works that this was a genre. We're kind of doing something here. This is sort of like bards telling tales. But in some of these tales, there is reflected or maybe invented a tradition by which Saint Procla, if you're Orthodox, Procla, if you're not, came and some miraculous stuff happened surrounding her with the trial of Jesus, and there was some healing of some kids. Again, none of this is remotely in the Bible or attested to anywhere other than in some much later fan fiction, but it's really interesting, and it's reflective of this thing that happens in the East where people are pretty sympathetic to Pontius Pilate. And there's this sense that Pilate became a Christian, that he really understood who Jesus was, but just didn't quite have the courage or the ability to do the right thing, and it really ate at him. Whereas in the West, more often the tradition is that he didn't have the courage to do the right thing, and it really ate at him, and then he died a horrible death, and it was tormented permanently in some river in France, or his body is mangled by demons in some river in Scotland. A whole bunch of places claim that Pontius Pilate ended up there, and some of them are happy that he ended up there. Others, the legends are like, oh, he's there and he's in eternal torment. Some people say Tiberius made Pilate commit suicide, and maybe his wife had to do the same. There's some much later medieval legends that have Pilate becoming a Christian and then getting crucified by Tiberius for becoming a Christian, or beheaded for becoming a Christian, and then his wife Procla, she ends up dying of a broken heart, or they get rescued from crucifixion together and are baptized miraculously from heaven, and then they get tracked down and their whole family gets crucified again later. As you can see, it's all over the map because, as I talked about in a video I did on Pontius Pilate, a big long video, a deep dive I did on the YouTube channel a while back, it's sort of a Rorschach test with this Pontius Pilate fellow, and by proxy also with his wife. You look at that, and depending on who, because of your misguided understanding of biblical theology, you want to blame for the crucifixion of Jesus, Pilate becomes either sympathetic or absolutely horrible. And again, I think the ambiguity of what we're seeing here in Matthew 27 lends itself to that all the further. Listen to the language. don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him. Well, if you read that and you fixate on the innocent part, then you're like, whoa, like this is Matthew's putting this in here because he wants to further vindicate Jesus. Look, even this pagan Gentile outsider can see that Jesus is an innocent man. She might not get that he's the Son of God or understand all the Jewish stuff yet, but she can see it better than the religious leaders. Well, guess what? That is very in keeping with themes throughout the book of Matthew, that the people who shouldn't be able to see it can see it. Indeed, even women who shouldn't be able to see anything based on first century Eastern Mediterranean norms. Well, this is some pretty progressive stuff because in the context of the kingdom, women have eyes to see and they get it and they see stuff that the brilliant, well-educated men folk can't see. Remember the Canaanite woman? I mean, she's a Gentile, she's a woman, and she understands who Jesus is. Pilate's wife seems to get it. How about the centurion from back in chapter 8? How about the Magi from the east? How can all of these people who are theoretically blind, like the actual blind guys in chapter 9, see who Jesus is, but the people who have eyes to see can't see it? Now, you remember all of that stuff, right? That theme is all over the place. So I think the most natural read of this passage in terms of why it's in here is what I just said. That's got to be it, right? But I also understand how if somebody is coming at this text and they still got the Julius Caesar and Calpurnia story rattling around in their head, maybe they're very interested in dreams and premonitions and dark omens and things like that, and they come to this, and what pops for them is like, oh, this is a warning, but Pilate ignored the warning. Well, what happens in all of these ancient stories when there's some kind of word of wisdom from the divine or from beyond the physical world, and then because of the hubris of the tragic main character, in this case, I guess that would be Pilate, they ignore the advice, they ignore the wisdom of the gods, and they suffer a horrible fate as a result. Well, you see how this works, right? If you read this thing and you're like, oh yeah, Jesus was innocent for sure. Look at that. It's a vindication of Jesus and it's an indictment of the stupid Roman system that had trouble getting things right with the law anyway, like say someone in the Eastern Mediterranean world would read it. They're not huge fans of Rome. They're huge fans of the traditions that preceded it, the Greek traditions. Well, they might look at that and be like, look, they got it. Pilate and Procla, they understood that he was innocent. These are people who no doubt came around to Christianity and understood it later. They should be revered, even revered as saints. But if you're coming from a more Western tradition where maybe you're a little bit more optimistic about the accuracy of Roman decision-making in the very early world, or you're coming from a more pagan point of view, it might be easier to latch on to the dark omens, the dreams of Julius Caesar's wife echoes that are present in this text, and say, Pilate was a fool. He ignored these dark tidings, and he made a mistake because of his arrogance. But you and I have the luxury of a couple thousand years, and well, like 3 years of those couple thousand years, you and I have spent poring over this document ourselves. So we got a pretty good investment here, and we have the luxury of being able to go back and be like, all right, but I mean, what do dreams mean in the Bible? Well, all over the Old Testament, truth is communicated in dreams, even though the Old Testament does acknowledge that your dream might not mean anything, like if you were just busy. Have you heard this one? Ecclesiastes 5, where is it? 3, as a dream comes when there are many cares, so the speech of a fool when there are many words. So the Bible does acknowledge that not every dream is this fountain of truth, but the beginning of Matthew, I mean, come on, the Magi are warned in a dream. Joseph is warned in a dream. Joseph is told in a dream, all right, you can go back now. There's all kinds of this sort of material where supernaturally God seems to be guiding the progress of his son, the progress of the culminating moment in the redemptive plan, that being Jesus' life and words and teachings and the crucifixion and the resurrection and all of that. You just can't ignore that dreams have played a significant role in that for those who are attentive to what God is doing and to those whom the text holds out as believing God. So here, for us, in the grand context of Matthew, I don't think it's that hard to figure out what he's doing here. The emphasis is on the innocence. This outsider, this lady, through the same means that other outsiders like the Magi or even Joseph were notified of things that are true and real, through the same supernatural process by which Peter was able to figure out that Jesus is the Christ, and then Jesus says it's not from you. Like, God opened your eyes to this thing. through that process of God opening people's eyes through dreams or in other ways, she has had her eyes opened up a little bit, and she can see, even a woman of such influence, the First Lady of Judea, even she knows that Jesus is innocent. And that is supposed to stand in stark contrast to the crowds who were standing outside, shrieking for Barabbas and demanding that Jesus be crucified. Hey, I mentioned the review thing yesterday and how much it helps to leave podcast reviews for this or any podcast that you care about and that you like. And immediately someone with a great username went and did that. Nat. That's honest. That's it. I don't know if I said it the right amount of times, but that's a brilliant username. I read your review. I really appreciate that. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for helping to get the word out about this so that we can include other people in the conversation, which I think is rad. More Matthew 27 next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.